All right. Today, this is episode 14
14.
of the American System of Political Economy podcast. Today, we have from the world leading authority on the American system, Mr. Neil Martin himself, James Swank, 1832 to 1914. Swank worked as an editor of a weekly Whig newspaper in Johnston, Pennsylvania. He was a lobbyist, writer of political economy books, and a statistician. He was also the chief clerk of the House Manufacturing Committee and also for agriculture for a brief time. While the chief clerk of the House Manufacturing, he became friends with the great protectionist Daniel Morrell Johnson. Some of Swank's books, were the history of the manufacture of iron in all ages, the industrial policies of Great Britain and the United States, and notes and comments on industrial, economic, political, and historical subjects. Swank did battle with British free trade and the Cobden Club. He went through US economic history and British policy in his writings. He tells us that the British saw furnaces and forges in the colonies to be detestable to England. Essentially, this represented a national security threat to England. He tells us about how the farmers benefit from protectionism. He says the populists were wrong in saying that industrial legislation harmed the farmers. He tells us about the tariff conventions the United States had, also including key names. He details how it was protection that developed England. He also says the British extends her territory through having more markets. What British free trade attains is territory for the British without even a shot being fired. We know our populists will never say this. James Swank knows what the British system of free trade does, and like an advocate of the American system, he makes it known how evil the British Empire was. They have not changed, by the way. James Swank's biggest role was as secretary of the American Iron and Steel Association. He was a secretary from January 1st, 1873 to about 1912 or 1913. The American Iron and Steel Association was the oldest protective tariff organization in US history. What were the chief tasks of a protectionist organization from the 1870s to the time of the Republican? The Republican lost the protective tariff war with the Democrats. Fight the British was the main fight the protective tariff organizations had. The protective tariff organizations were the most patriotic organizations. They detested the British. The American Iron and Steel Organization taught people the American system of political economy. In the 1890s, they put out a book filled with pamphlets and speeches by Americans. Some of them included Henry Carey Beard, Van Buren Denslow, John Lord Hayes, former Congressman Daniel Johnson Morrell, James Swank, James Wharton, and former Congressman William D. Kelly. Swank honoring the greats. Swank wrote a tribute to Henry C. Carey for his centenary birth and paid Alexander Hamilton great homage with stories of his excellency. What makes an economic historian great? It is the stories he has about great economists. If people never heard of Alexander Hamilton, they will now. Over to you, Neil.
You're not going to read the Alexander Hamilton stories?
Oh, there's still more. In Matthew Carey's preface to the edition of Hamilton's report, which we have before us, he says, quote, I hope we shall live to see the day. If we do not, assuredly our children will, when medals will be struck and monuments erected to the memory of Alexander Hamilton. Swank added, quote, but no medals have been struck and no monuments have been erected In memory of this father of the American policy of protection to home industry, except the small and time-worn shaft erected by relatives over his grave in Trinity Churchyard in New York. But Hamilton's memory may yet be suitably honored, unquote. Swank said in a letter which we have received from Honorable John Dalzell, a distinguished representative in Congress from Pennsylvania, who has been a member of the Ways and Means Committee since 1891. That gentleman said of Hamilton, quote, his tariff argument has never been added to. Every tariff speech in our history simply repeats the ideas that he stated in the first instance. We have never done him justice. Jefferson is lauded while Hamilton is neglected. He ought to stand a colossal figure in bronze or marble in front of the Treasury, unquote. Over to you, Neil.
Okay. So this presentation is going to be on James Moore Swank. The title of the presentation is How to Not Listen to the British. How to not listen to the British needs to be done today in the world. Globalization, British free trade, British foreign policy is a threat to national security and a threat to the earth. We're dealing with a crisis where the United States of America and England are now using long-range missiles to target strategic places in Russia or other places. This can start thermonuclear war between Russia and NATO. The free traders who love free trade are not going to do anything at all to stop this. Where do we see the role of free trade back in the 19th century? The free traders wanted to destroy the United States of America. And James M. Swank did all that he could do in fighting the British Empire. So I entitled this presentation, How to Not Listen to the British. This is how we're going to get ourselves out of a crisis. We have to stop listening to the British because all the British want to do, they don't want to promote the advantage of the other. They have permanent interests, not permanent allies. Next slide, Victor. Okay, so the title, How to Not Listen to the British. Notes and comments on industrial, economic, political, and historical subjects by James Moore Swank, Philadelphia, The Iron and Steel Association, 1897. Next slide. So the British did not like the United States of America rivaling them in manufacturing. They were saying, how come the United States of America did not listen to us when we told them to be an agricultural economy? This is what the Adam Smith School said to the United States of America. So here we have the British suggesting that the United States of America, with all this land and massive potential for an agro-industrial economy, and Adam Smith is saying you should be an agricultural economy. The British free traders, such as Joshua Gee, who's before Adam Smith, wanted the 13 colonies to export raw materials and foodstuffs to England and to Europe. They didn't want the United States of America to be an agro-industrial economy. And all people want to talk about is taxation without representation. The reason why the American Revolution happened was because the 13 colonies wanted domestic commerce. You don't get domestic commerce without manufacturing. Go back to the slide, Victor. I'm going to read the slide.
Yeah, you got to figure out what exactly your modus operandi is. Are you going to read the slide first and then talk, or are you going to talk and then read the slide? Which one is it?
I'm going to do an introduction, the slide, and then talk.
And so you want me to leave the slide up while you're doing the introduction, wait till you read the slide, and then take the slide off. Is that what you want?
Yes, that's right. That's cool.
Yeah, it'll be helpful to let me know.
Yeah. All
Okay.
right. Okay. Get your knowledge of protectionism from a protectionist, not a free trader. By the help of our policy of protection of home industries, the United States is now fully abreast of Great Britain as a manufacturing country, and the advice of the British writers to confine our energies to agriculture has given way to serious apprehension concerning the manufacturing and commercial prosperity of our own country. Continental and American manufacturers, having successively invaded the home markets of the United Kingdom, as well as those of colonial and other markets, which British manufacturers once regarded as their exclusive possession. All right, you can switch to full picture. Okay, so there's three things that's mentioned here. James Moore Swank is saying the United States of America started to rival the British in manufacturing. The British previously told the United States of America, you're going to be an agricultural economy. Swank rejected that. Protectionists rejected that. Not only that, but the whole concept of the United States of America is going to be an agricultural economy. What does that mean? What does that actually mean? The United States of America is going to be an agricultural economy. It means that we're going to have consumers, not citizens. It means we're going to have foreign markets, not home markets. We're going to have unchecked foreign trade, not domestic commerce. Invasive foreign trade, not technological progress. I mean, technological transfers. We're going to have war, not joining the Belt and Road Initiative. We're going to have environmentalism and not Earth as the great labor savings bank. So, this whole policy that the British wanted the United States of America to have was that they were going to create a country of consumers. A country of consumers. That's not the purpose of the Declaration of Independence. The Declaration of Independence never stated we want to be consumers to the British Empire. We wanted domestic commerce, right? The United States of America, the 13 colonies, they wanted economic sovereignty. They sealed it with the Constitution, the 1789 Constitution, but you needed protective tariffs. We never just had one protective tariff. We had protective tariff, free trade tariff, protective tariff, free trade tariff. Why is that the case? We kept on switching from protectionism to free trade. The British. You had Democrats and Republicans or people before them going with free trade. Free trade is a colonial economic policy, right? So put this in your mind, right? I state, right? James Moore Swank is saying today in the 1890s, the United States and continental Europe, such as the country of France and Germany, are competing in Britain's market, their world market. Same thing with the United States. They're rivaling the British and defeating them in their former markets. The British are not going to take this lying down. They're going to have to do something, right? What in a time of crisis, an economic crisis, what do the British do? They organize for war. They organized for World War One because of what the United States of America, France, and Germany were doing. They had a policy of protectionism. in the late 19th century and early 20th century. And the British squashed protectionism in the United States of America. They couldn't get it done away with in France and Germany, but they did with the 1913 Underwood Tariff, signed by the treasonous President Woodrow Wilson, who was a free trader, right? So we're gonna take a look at this. We're gonna take a look at this thing again, where the British are saying the United States of America needs to be an agricultural economy. Let's take a look at globalization. What is globalization doing? Globalization says you have to accept comparative advantage. You have to accept laissez-faire. And some countries are just going to export foodstuffs and raw materials to foreign countries. That's not how you do nation building. That's how you create colonies. So today, the economic system that the West is using, that Africa's using, that Ibero-America is using, that Southeast Asia is using, is a colonial economic policy. And free traders will never admit that. Next slide, Victor. Okay, so this next slide is about Great Great Britain telling the United States of America that we are going to allow for you to make bar iron and pig iron because we don't have the capabilities to make it. But you are not going to go any further than bar iron and pig iron. You are not going to make high grade iron. You're not going to make steel. That's our turf, right? So hold on. The British don't have the capabilities to make enough pig iron and bar iron, but the 13 colonies do. Why can't the 13 colonies make steel and high grade iron? Let's find out. The British never wanted her colonies to develop. The production of pig iron and bar iron in the colonies was encouraged by England soon after 1731 because she did not have a sufficient supply of these crude articles of her own manufacture, owing to the scarcity of charcoal, which was the only fuel then used in making iron. Pig iron and bar iron were exported from the colonies to England in the first half of the 18th century, and shipments of these articles to the mother country attained considerable portions in subsequent years. But the mother country always discouraged the manufacture in the colonies of the more finished forms of iron and of all kinds of steel. England preferred to keep at home all manufacturing enterprises like those mentioned, that she might sell their products to the struggling colonists on the Atlantic coast at a good profit. I'm going to do the commentary now, Victor. Okay, so the British stated that we don't want you producing high grade iron and steel in the 13 colonies because this is going to take away from our profits. You are our market. You do not have the authority to be economically independent. You are not going to develop an iron industry and a steel industry. Who would tolerate such a thing? This is not globalization. The British already know that comparative advantage does not work, that laissez faire is not working because the 13 colonies want to build high grade iron and steel. The 13 colonies, they are not accepting laissez faire. And no history books in the United States of America will ever cover such a thing like that. If a history book said that the United States of America or the 13 colonies did not accept laissez-faire, it'll cause hell will freeze over, right? Because the British narrative on the American Revolution is taxation without representation. The American colonies were not into economic independence. They were selfish. They had their permanent interests. No, the American colonies had the principle of the advantage of the other, which the British don't never want to instill in their foreign policy or economic policy. Now, you ask this question: why would the British not want the 13 colonies to have to develop high grade iron and steel? This question is going to be answered later on in the presentation, but just remember this: economic sovereignty is all what nation building is about. The British colonial free trade system is not about building economic sovereignty. As I alluded to before, the British want consumers and not citizens. They want growing foreign commerce. They want to restrict domestic commerce. They don't want technological transfers. They want invasive foreign trade. They want war. They don't want the United States and Europe to join the Belt and Road Initiative. They want the Great Reset, environmentalism, and not making the earth the great labor savings bank. This is what the British want, right? So we're seeing what the United States of America wants, what the colonies want. They want to develop high grade iron and have a steel industry. What can you do with iron and iron and steel industry? We're going to find out later, right? Okay, Victor, go on to the next slide, please. Okay, so the title of the presentation is How to Not Listen to the British, right? Project 1619 gets a failure in talking and doing presentations about the 13 colonies and the United States of America. If all you want to do is talk about Native Americans and slavery when you talk about the United States of America, you are an official concubine and lapdog of the British Empire. You don't belong in the United States of America. You're a traitor. You commit treason, and you should go to England and be a lapdog there. You can be whatever gender you want to while you're in England, but in the United States of America, you have to do nation building, right? And so the story goes as this, right? The states are not listening to British economists. States in the newly founded republic, after the Constitution was signed, they started making petitions and submitting petitions to the United States government of George Washington. These petitions were not about single issues. The number one petition was, we want the United States of America to have protectionism. Article 1, Section 8 clearly defines that the Congress has the power to regulate trade and commerce. When it says Congress shall have the power to legislate for trade and commerce, that is protectionism. That is not free trade. That is not laissez-faire. That is not saying we're going to honor Ricardo's comparative advantage. The 13 colonies were not listening. I mean, the states, the newly formed states, they were not listening to British economists such as Adam Smith. And I'm going to read the quote. The first petition that was presented to the first Congress in March 1789, before Washington's inauguration, emanated from over 700 mechanics and other citizens of the town of Baltimore, who prayed that Congress would render the country independent in fact as well as in name by imposing protective duties on foreign manufacturers. Other petitions of like character were presented from citizens of Boston, New York, Philadelphia, Charleston, and other places. I'm doing commentary now, Victor. Okay, so the 5 states and other places were not listening to the British. They did not accept laissez-faire. They were not listening to David Ricardo's comparative advantage. They wanted a nation state. They wanted domestic commerce, right? At first, when I saw this quote, I said, damn, Maryland was the first state to have a petition circulating and submitted to the government to demand for protective duties on foreign manufacturers. That's my home state, the old line state. I was proud, right? But what I saw after a while and looking at this, I said, hold on. These states and other places are not listening to the British. If you want to be an American citizen, do not listen to the British. That's why the title of this presentation, that's why the title of this presentation is called How to Not Listen to the British. Now, if you do not, if the states decided that, listen, we're not going to listen to the British, right? If they're not listening to the British, who else are they not listening to? They're not listening to prominent British economists. And who was the most prominent British economist in the latter half of the 18th century? Adam Smith, Mr. Buy in the cheapest market. You don't need a diversity of employment. You don't need to worry about an imbalance of trade. That's Adam Smith. Frederick List refutes him for that. Henry Carey refutes him for that, right? What the states wanted to do, they had the principle of the advantage of the other. The British did not. Everything that the British do is for permanent interest. The British go by might is right. They go by the ends justify the means. They will use their own population to get an economic policy practice throughout the world. They don't care, right? So these states, right? You gotta ask this question. How did the free traders explain this? Did these states know how important domestic industries were? Did they know how important domestic commerce was? Did they know how important a diversity of employments was? Did they know how to circulate currency? Did they know how to make agriculture prosper? Did they know how important economic sovereignty was? Did they have a high view of earth, of God and man? Yes, they did. And if you have all this, what I just described, you are not going to listen to the British, right? If you want to be an American, do not listen to the British. The British have lapdogs in the United States government, such as Joe Biden, Blinken, Sullivan. You have them throughout the Democratic Party and Republican Party. Do not listen to them. Do not listen to the British. They represent the British Empire. And the United States of America has to break ties with the British, right? What Maryland, Pennsylvania, New York, Charleston, and what's the other state? What's the other state? Massachusetts, what they were doing, they wanted to be American. They wanted to be sovereign, right? And this story is not in US history books. You may find it in economic history books because what James Swank is doing in this book, He's telling economic history, right? The best economic historians for the United States of America are protectionists. They cannot be free traders because free traders don't want to tell the truth about economic sovereignty and nation building. Next slide show, Victor. Okay, so there was this Confederate general who is the son of Zachary Taylor, a president. He reveals something about what is the purpose of free trade and how much he was a lapdog and concubine of the British Empire, right? Let's see what he has to say, right? So this is James Moore Swank speaking. Protectionism is why the North won the Civil War. Project 1619 is never going to say that. British historians, American historians, they're never going to say that. But let's see what James Moore Swank has dug up in wonderful economic intelligence. So here's James Swank. A similar Southern tribute to the excellence of our protective policy and to its influence in blighting the hopes of the friends of the Southern Confederacy was expressed a few years ago by General Richard Taylor of Louisiana, a Confederate. Another word for Confederate is British concubine. Officer of distinction, a British concubine. In a review of the war, which was expected to establish free trade as a means of prosperity in the South, the British concubine, General Taylor says, we made two great mistakes. Had we avoided them, we should have conquered you, the North and West. The first was that we did not substantially destroy the protective features of the tariff in the winter session of 1857 to 1858 by an act which provided for a rapid sliding scale to free trade. As a democratic measure, we could have passed such a law and held it tight on you till it closed the furnaces, workshops, woolen and cotton mills, and steel and bar iron works for the whole North and West, and scattered your workmen over the prairies and territories. I'm going to do commentary now, Victor. Okay, so this British concubine, General Richard Taylor, this is just letting it all hang out. He knows what is the purpose of free trade. Today, if you go online and type down free trade and say, what is the purpose of free trade? The purpose of free trade is to make countries have more access to markets. It's to give consumers more choices. It's to fight evil monopolies that protectionism creates, right? Okay, well, this guy, Richard Taylor, is saying that we're going to use free trade to destroy protectionism. What's the consequence of that? What is the consequence of that? You're going to close down the cotton mills, the steel and bar iron works. You're going to close down the furnaces, the workshops. Do free traders ever admit that? Do they ever admit that they want to deindustrialize and destroy domestic commerce in the United States of America? They never say that at all. This is shocking. But that's not the most shocking thing that this guy says, right? Because remember, I'm a student of Henry Carey, right? And let me tell you something about Henry Carey. Henry Carey is the only protectionist American system advocate that moans and makes a big stink about centralization when you had free trade periods. The saying, go west, young man, was promoted. Go west. Are you going to establish domestic commerce, diversity of employment? No. You're going to establish farms, right? You're going to turn a manufacturing class in the north, send them out west, and they're going to become farmers, right? You're going to destroy diversity of employments. You want to scatter, as he said, you're going to scatter the workmen in prairies and territories. What are they going to do? They're going to farm. They're not going to be engaged in industries at all whatsoever. Why do we need so many farms in the United States of America in the 19th century? If we take a look at Henry Carey's economic diagram, I don't have the diagram on me right now, right? But what I want to say is that to the to the far right, to the far left of the economic diagram, you had the Rocky Mountains. You should have had the South on there too, because the South was a shithole, right? You had a few other countries in the Midwest, or countries that were near the Mississippi or west of the Mississippi, right? You didn't have domestic commerce. Land was not high in value. Raw materials were cheap. Finished commodities were expensive. The value of man was low. The circulation of the currency was low. This is what free trade did to the United States of America. And Richard Taylor knows that, and he said nothing about it. He said, we want free trade. Free trade is going to have us win the Civil War. Free trade would have had the South win the Civil War. Now, what are these African Americans who like free trade? What are they going to say about that? Free trade? If the North and the West had the same free trade that the South had, the South would have won the war. What are these copperhead Democrats going to say? That their system of free trade would have destroyed the North and West. The far right of the economic diagram, no domestic commerce. The view of man is low. Land is low. It's not being developed. The earth is not the great labor savings bank. There's no domestic commerce. The currency is not circulating well. That's free trade. That's what free trade did every time in the United States of America in the 19th century and 18th century, right? This guy, Richard Taylor, is a bona fide free trader. He knows what he's talking about. He's not a post-Carnes free trader, right? Because post-Carnes free traders are going to say, oh, free trade gives more options to consumers. It gives countries more access to markets. That's not free trade. Free trade is a country committing economic suicide. Free trade is destroying the sovereign nation state. Free trade is not making the earth the great labor savings bank. Free trade is not promoting the advantage of the other and the golden rule. Free trade is promoting permanent interest. Next slide show, Victor. Do you want to take a break or should we keep on going, Victor?
Keep going.
Okay. So populists do not know political economy and attacking the Carbon Club. So populists who got Grover Cleveland elected over James Blaine were not protectionists. They were against the system of protectionists. They were British concubines, right? What do British concubines like doing? They like disorganizing the population, right? Such as the Cobden Club. I've never heard of the populists attacking the Cobden Club or attacking the British Empire. Today's populists are what you call communists, right? They don't talk about the Cobden Club. They don't talk about the British Empire. They don't talk about regulating trade and commerce. They are never going to give presentations on the American system like I do. They're just not going to do that. They're no better than Project 1619. We're going to read the quote. If protective tariff legislation has built up domestic manufacturers, have not the mills and furnaces and factories and workshops created by this legislation greatly increased the demand for agricultural products? Have not the farmers' markets grown in wonderful development of manufacturing industries? Every intelligent farmer knows that protective tariff legislation has had this just effect. And he knows that this legislation, by developing our resources and creating competition in all manufacturing pursuits, has cheapened the cost of transporting agricultural products to both domestic and foreign markets, cheapen the cost of agricultural implements, and cheapen the cost of everything that the farmer has to buy. I'm going to do commentary now, Victor. So, the farmer's question was best addressed by American system economists and advocates, such as Benjamin Franklin, Matthew Carey, Alexander Hamilton, Henry Carey, and James Swank, just to name a few names, right? James Swank is saying if we develop our domestic commerce, this is going to develop domestic industries. This is not going to suppress and oppress the agricultural class. It's going to elevate them. But the free traders don't want that. They are against the harmony of interest, just like Marx. Marx was against the harmony of interest. They wanted to pit manufacturing against agriculture. Why do you want to do that? That sounds like a British game. Well, you got to understand communists and populists are British concubines, just like Confederates. They're British concubines, right? And so we take a look at this, right? The American system knows how to nation build. They're saying we are going to promote protectionism in our land, right? When we promote protectionism, the agricultural class is going to prosper, right? The agricultural class, they're going to get their farming implements cheaper. They're going to pay less for transportation, right? The Cobden Club didn't like that message. What they were doing, the Cobden Club was telling the Western farmer, right? If you want to see or find out about the most egregious attempt to interfere in American elections, it was not 2016. That was made up by Hillary Clinton. The most blatant act of election interference was what the British Empire did with the Cobden Club, and on what the Cobden Club did by deploying Cobden Club agents all throughout the west part of the United States of America to manipulate the Western farmer to think that protectionism is bad for the farmer. They're saying you don't need an American market. You can have a European market and a British market. We will supply you with farming implements way cheaper. We will supply you with textile goods and manufacturing goods way cheaper. You don't need to be an agro-industrial economy. Remember how the title of the presentation is How to Not Listen to the British, right? The Western farmer should have not listened to the British, but some of them did, right? James Swank, he has an excellent section in his book where he's talking to the farmers, right? He's telling the farmers one thing. He said the United States overdid it with promoting um the land grant policy of creating farms out west. He said we overdid it. Is a free trader ever going to admit that? No. The free traders like William Sumner said the United States of America should be an agricultural economy. He was saying this in the freaking 1880s. The United States of America, from sea to shining sea, from the Atlantic coast to the Pacific Ocean, he was saying that all the territory of the United States of America in the 1880s should be devoted towards agriculture. No agro-industrial economy. What is this, some type of plantation? It's not called the United States of Plantations. It's called the United States of America. We're not going to have plantations in the United States of America. We're going to have domestic commerce. We're going to have diversity of employments. We're going to circulate the currency properly. And we're going to make the United States of America, the earth, the great labor savings bank. That's what we're going to do. And this is what James Swank was calling for. This is just the whole question with the farmers question is very important. And the reason why it's very important is one, it shows the wickedness of the British on how the British wanted to destroy protectionism in the United States of America and make the United States of America become the United States of plantations, right? It attacks the Copperheads. It attacks the Confederacy. Well, not they it was after the Civil War, but they were still Confederates, right? It attacks free traders. And it has to do that. Because if the American system does not attack the British, it's not protectionist, right? Michael Hudson, the jabroni, he doesn't attack the British. He's not a protectionist. He's not a protectionist. He likes this economist by the name of Simon Patton. Simon Patton is a jabroni. He is not a protectionist. He does not attack the British system like Henry Carey did. But yet this guy, Simon Patton, is held by Michael Hudson as the most original economist of the 19th century, which is a bunch of bullcrap, right? If we take a look at what James Swank is talking about, James Swank is way better than Simon Patton. He's way better. I have provided you with economic intelligence, economic theory. What have the free traders provided the United States of America with? Oh, we're going to use free trade to destroy the United States of America and to create the policy of centralization where the United States is to the far left of the economic diagram where there is no domestic commerce. That's what they want. If they get the farmers to go along with free trade, they will destroy and decapitate domestic commerce. James Swank knew this. Protectionists knew this. Next slide, please, Victor.
You're asking for the next slide?
Yeah, next slide, Victor. We would be nowhere without iron and steel manufacturers. Now, in the beginning of the presentation, I said a little while later on, I'm going to talk to you about the significance of the iron and steel works in the United States of America. Well, now you're going to see the significance of the iron and steel works in the United States of America. and you're going to find out something about domestic commerce and what protectionism does, which free trade is never going to talk about. But while full force should be given to the tremendous demand which all our railroads have made upon our iron and steel works, our bridge works, our car and locomotive works, our car wheel works, and our machine shops and foundries, the fact is equally worthy of consideration that a large part of our railroad mileage could not have been built if our iron and steel manufacturers had not been encouraged by the protective policy to increase their facilities for the production of iron and steel. And if the competition between these manufacturers had not greatly reduced the prices of their products, most notably of steel rails, as had already been shown. So, commentary. I'm going to do commentary, Victor. Okay. So James Swank has said the iron and steel works facilitated the growth of the railroad industry, right? It created bridge works, car and locomotive works, car wheel works, the machine shops and foundries. And then he says, okay, all this domestic commerce was created. This diversity of employments was created. But we would have been nowhere without the protective legislation that provided the grounds for the iron and steel works, for the railroads to be built in the United States of America. You needed protection for that, right? And one of the sophisms of free trade is, oh, you don't want to import steel rails? You want to make steel rails in your home country? It's going to cost too much. You should go with comparative advantage. Listen, the American system of political economy does not go by laissez-faire. We reject laissez-faire. We reject David Ricardo's comparative advantage. We say the way you prosper is that you do not listen to the British, right? You stick a middle finger up at the British and tell them to piss off, right? And so all this railroad mileage that the United States of America developed. Before the Civil War, we had about 60,000 miles of railroad. By the turn of the 20th, by the 20th century, we had 200,000 miles of railroad. Most of those railroads were made in the United States of America. This must have costed, I don't know how much. Maybe steel railroads was like 200 tons to $200 per ton. It must have been outrageous because what these free traders like to do, right? They say, oh, if you make your own product, it's going to cost so much money. Why don't you import it? You have to buy in the cheapest market. We want domestic commerce, idiot. We do not want free trade, right? You're telling us that the protective tariff increases prices forever. You really want to tell us this? You really want to tell us this? You want to tell us that protective tariffs increase the prices of manufacturing goods forever? You really want to tell us this? That's what free traders have been saying since the 19th century, probably since the 18th century, right? But they're wrong, right? Okay, so Swank is saying that protectionism reduced the prices of of steel goods in the United States of America. That's what he's saying, right? He's saying because of domestic competition, right? What creates domestic competition? Protectionism. But do free traders ever say that? No, they never say that. Victor, next slide, please. Okay, a sophism of free trade. Tariffs will just raise prices of commodities. That's a big sophism of free trade. A very big sophism, right? Free trade is against economic sovereignty. What you got to also remember about free traders, right? They say sophisms of free trade. Tariffs will just raise prices of commodities. You should import them. This is from the same people who were discouraging the 13 colonies and the states from not having advanced ironworks and steel mills in the United States of America. They're saying you don't have to have ironworks and steel mills in the United States of America. You'll get it from the British. Then they come up with comparative advantage to try to trick the United States of America and foreign countries to have England be the workshop of the world, and all countries in Europe, in the United States. The United States becomes the United States of plantations. Supply the British with foodstuffs and raw materials, and the British will be the chief manufacturing power. That's a load of crap. Protectionism is not going to raise the prices of commodities forever. It is not going to do that. Now I'm going to read the quote. When it was proposed in Congress in 1870 to place a protective duty of $28 a ton on imported steel rails, Mr. Kerr, British concubine, Mr. Marshall, British concubine, all Democrats, by the way, prominent members of the House of Representatives, earnestly protested against the proposed duty because it would so increase the cost of foreign steel rails that our railroad companies could not afford to import them. The average price of Bessemer steel rails in this country in 1870 was $106.75 a ton in currency. The duty of $28 a ton was imposed in that year, and the price of steel rails fell in 5 years to an average of $68.76 a ton. You do the math. Is that an increase? Is the tariff causing an increase of the price of steel rails? No, it's not doing that. And it has never since risen above those figures, but has steadily fallen in most of the succeeding years. In the whole year of 1894, the price was $24 a ton. And every part of 1895, it was $22 a ton, or less than a cent a pound. In the latter part of 1895 and 1896, it was $28 a ton, which is exactly the amount of the duty that was imposed in 1870. And in 1897, the price fell for a few days below $17 a ton. What are the free traders smoking? What in the world are they talking about? They're saying that protectionism is going to raise the price of steel. The price of steel in 1870 was $106.75. 5 years later, it decreased to $68. Maybe I don't know how to do math, right? But you look at that, and the price of steel dropped. It didn't increase like what the free traders say, right? Because you have a whole lot of jabronis who think protectionism just raises the price of commodities. James Moore Swank is not lying. He's the secretary of the American Iron and Steel Association. He knows his facts about iron and steel. He knows it, right? And it just keeps on going. 1894, $24 a ton. 1895, $22 a ton. 1895 and in 1896, $28 a ton. 1897, for a few days, $17 a ton. How did this happen? Well, one of the main goals of protectionism is to develop domestic industries, develop domestic commerce, and have domestic competition. The free traders never talk about domestic competition. When you hear them talk about protectionism, they never say protectionism increases domestic commerce and creates the environment for domestic competition. They never talk about that, right? Domestic competition is not created by free trade. How are these free traders going to explain this, right? The price of steel rails in 1870 was $106.75 a ton. And by 1896, the price for steel was $28 a ton. Either James Swank is the biggest liar on the planet, either I'm a big fool, or the free traders are regurgitating manure from their mouth when they talk about the protective tariff. I think the free traders are regurgitating manure out their mouths, right? The free traders do not want domestic commerce. They don't want domestic industries. They don't want domestic competition. Do a Google search, type down protectionism, and see if domestic competition ever comes up. See if the currency is circulating properly. See if a diversification of employments increases, but concentrate on domestic competition. Concentrate on that, right? The United States of America was not listening to the British. How did the United States of America develop the iron and steel industries? By not listening to the British. James Swank provides us with excellent economic intelligence. This is the first book in 1897. This is the first book which tells the truth about what the protective tariff did for the iron and steel works and what it did to the prices of steel rails. Okay, next slide, Victor. Next slide, Victor. Okay, British economic warfare. Shut up about trade war. Okay, so when Donald Trump was president for his first term, they were saying that, oh, these tariffs that Trump's using, they're going to create a trade war. What is free trade? Free trade is economic warfare. The British system of free trade is economic warfare. Colonial economics is economic warfare. I'm getting sick and tired of people saying that tariffs creates trade wars. What does free trade create? Heaven on earth? Okay, so James Swank, he uses a quote that Henry Carey was the best at organizing around. Henry Carey, this quote that I'm about to read, Henry Carey has the quote in 4 of his books. How to Outdo the British Without Fighting Her. I might have the title wrong. Commerce, Christianity, and Civilization versus British Free Trade. Letters to the President, to the jabroni, James Buchanan. And lastly, Principles of Social Science, right? And we're going to read the quote. Henry C. Carey was fond of quoting the following extract from a report made by a British parliamentary commission in 1854, in which we have already quoted in a preceding chapter. The laboring classes, generally in the manufacturing districts of this country, and especially in the iron and coal districts, are very little aware of the extent to which they are often indebted for their being employed at all to the immense losses which their employers voluntarily incur in bad times in order to destroy foreign competition and to gain and keep possession of foreign markets. The large capitals of this country are the great instruments of warfare against the competing capital of foreign countries. And Mr. Carey was never at a loss for vigorous words of condemnation of this piratical British policy, which has never been abandoned. Okay, so one of your jobs as an economic historian, you have to talk about the baddest political economist that lived in the 19th century. And that person was Henry C. Carey. James Swank does a marvelous job at telling the population who's the best economist of the 19th century. As I said and stated already, Henry Carey organized around this parliamentary commission, quote, the most, right? Stephen Caldwell was the first one to introduce it in footnotes, but Henry Carey had it in 4 books. Well, 2 books and 2 pamphlets, right? And so we're taking a look at this, right? The laboring classes. Oh, Victor, can you go to the commentary, please? Okay, so the laboring classes are being used to destroy foreign industries around the world, right? Remember about the British, right? The British go by the ends justify the means. They don't care about their workforce. They don't care about their population. They want to decapitate domestic commerce, domestic industries, and destroy nation states, right? And remember, if the British are saying this, if the British are saying what we have to do to destroy home industries in foreign countries is that we have to use our capital, our money man who own manufacturers. They need cheap raw materials and cheap labor. That's how they're going to destroy home markets, take home markets and destroy home manufacturers. If the British are saying this, it looks like laissez-faire is not working. It looks like the British are not able to convince other countries that comparative advantage is the holy grail, and it works. Laissez-faire is not working. That's what the British are recognizing. This 1854 Parliamentary Commission report, they're recognizing that laissez-faire doesn't work. Adam Smith does not work. Comparative advantage does not work, right? And Henry Carey said this policy, this economic warfare, he's calling free trade economic warfare, this view of man is economic warfare? Kerry said that. The view of man that the British have is economic warfare, because you see the view of man in this, right? When he is saying that you're going to use cheap labor and cheap raw materials to destroy foreign industries, that's conveying a view of man that is evil, right? And nobody calls this economic warfare, but you call a few tariffs a trade war. But what I just read about the British, right? This is not even a full quote. The full quote is worse, right? Henry Carey, he does commentary and says they want to destroy diversification of employments. They want to destroy association. They want to destroy association and diversification of employments. Hold on, what's that? That's free trade. That's what General Richard Taylor said. This is what free trade does. Free trade is going to destroy industries in the United States of America and throughout the world. And the British are saying, we're going to use our large capitals to decapitate foreign industries. We want their markets. That is pure permanent interest. That's not the advantage of the other. That is not developing nation states. That's not the advantage of the other principle. That is pure Satanism. How to not listen to the British. Implement the American system of political economy. And this is what I got from reading James M. Swank. The presentation's over.